Have you ever wondered what made Lot's wife look back? In a moment of crisis, with the city ablaze and destruction imminent, she hesitated. Why risk everything for a single act of disobedience? The story of Lot's wife is one of the most intriguing and, at the same time, misunderstood passages of the Bible. Some see it as a warning against disobedience, while others interpret it as a symbol of a divided heart. But perhaps the true impact of this story lies in something deeper. A reminder that when we cling to the past, we condemn ourselves to a stagnant and paralyzed life. And the most shocking lesson of all? You might be doing the exact same thing without even realizing it. It's difficult to admit, but how many times do we hold on to things that no longer serve us? How often do we hesitate to abandon habits, relationships, or even thoughts that trap us in cycles of suffering? Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt, yes, but not out of sheer curiosity. She became a monument to what happens when someone refuses to heed God's voice and leave the past behind. And here's the surprising part. You might also be turning into a pillar in some aspect of your life. If this sounds controversial, it's because it is. Her story is a warning as relevant today as it was when it was first written. In this video, we will delve into the often overlooked details and understand how the lesson of Lot's wife applies to your life today. What can you do to avoid becoming a pillar in your dreams, your faith, or your relationships? If you've ever felt stuck, unable to move forward, this message is for you. Get ready to discover the secret behind that backward glance and how a simple gesture can define your entire journey. In an era marked by excesses and wickedness, the story of Lot's wife emerges as a powerful reflection of human behavior when faced with choices and their consequences. When we think of Sodom and Gomorrah, the image of a city steeped in corruption, where sin spread like wildfire, immediately comes to mind. It was in this context that Lot's wife lived. Despite being married to a man who feared God, she found herself torn between attachment to the practices and comforts of that city and obedience to the divine call. The destruction of Sodom wasn't just a condemnation of its people, but a strong symbol of the traps of clinging to what God has already condemned. However, many forget that before the fateful glance back, Lot's wife had already shown signs of hesitation. When the angels visited her home to warn of the impending destruction, her reaction was marked by fear and doubt. The urgency of departure contrasted sharply with her hidden desire to stay. This is an interesting parallel to today. How often are we warned by God, through circumstances, to distance ourselves from something, yet we feel an inexplicable resistance? The heart clings to what is familiar, even when the soul perceives the danger. Looking back, therefore, was merely the culmination of a process of disobedience that had already begun within her. And here lies the warning. It is dangerous when our thoughts remain in the comfort zones that God has already asked us to leave. Perhaps this same behavior manifests itself in small actions in your daily life. Think of habits you know need to be changed, situations that no longer align with God's plan for your life, yet you still hesitate to abandon them. The story of Lot's wife echoes the warning that looking back is more than a physical movement. It is a state of the heart that distances us from the promises of the Father. The simple act of looking back may seem harmless, but in the story of Lot's wife, this gesture carried immense spiritual weight. Her transformation into a pillar of salt represents much more than physical punishment. It is the materialization of attachment to the past. By looking back, she demonstrated, even if only briefly, that her heart was still tied to the life that God was destroying. It wasn't merely a curious glance. It was a refusal to move forward into the new. How many of us find ourselves at a similar crossroads, where the past, filled with memories and illusions of comfort, seems more appealing than the uncertain path ahead? And this is where the depth of the story is revealed. What was it in Sodom that still held her back? Family? Friends? Possessions? Or perhaps the pleasure of a life without restrictions? Today, we are tempted to look back when God calls us to a new level of obedience, to break away from old behaviors or people who no longer share our faith. That job that distanced you from a deeper relationship with God, but paid well. That group of friends that influenced you negatively, but provided company on lonely nights. The attachment to what God has already said no to reveals that our transformation is not yet complete. When we cling to the past, we become statues, immovable, stuck in a place that no longer exists. The salt that covered Lot's wife represents the bitterness we experience when we try to relive what God has declared finished. Like her, we risk becoming monuments to a life that did not progress, to a faith that stagnated. For this reason, it is crucial to conduct an honest examination of what holds us back from moving toward what God has prepared. Can you identify the Sodoms in your life that still draw your gaze? Disobedience, in a biblical context, is never an isolated act. It always brings consequences beyond the individual. Lot's wife's decision didn't just affect her, it left a profound mark on her family and humanity's history. This event teaches us that our choices, especially those that contradict God's will, can have devastating impacts. Why, then, is obedience so difficult? The answer lies in the internal struggle between faith in the unseen and the desire to control what we know. When God says, "Don't look back," He is protecting us from unseen dangers in attachment. Consider Jesus' words in the New Testament. Remember Lot's wife, Luke 17:32. He recalls this story to warn against losing focus on the spiritual mission during crucial moments. Looking back is like questioning God's direction, and this always comes with losses, not just material, but spiritual ones. Perhaps you face challenges where obedience feels risky, leaving a relationship, stepping down from a position, or even changing habits that distort your identity in Christ. In these moments, remember that obedience attracts protection and blessings only God can give. On the other hand, disobedience not only blocks our journey, but also exposes us to divine judgment. The story of Lot's wife is a vivid reminder that God's commands are for our safety, not restriction. The good news is, unlike Lot's wife, we still have time to change course. The opportunity to return to obedience is always open. The question is, are you willing to abandon what holds you back?